The Mega Man series has always been known for a certain level of challenge. Makes sense since it debuted on the NES with its reputation for being Nintendo hard. While I can beat most of these games in one sitting these days, when I was a kid, I couldn't even clear one. It wasn't until the Anniversary Collection on the GameCube during my adolescence that I started seeing success. Coincidentally, around the same time I started having less restrictions with my TV time. Out of the platformer titles, I'd probably say that, while requiring some skill, Classic is probably the easiest to get into, X giving you more tools to help you out but expecting more from you in return, and the Zero games, well, let's just say I wouldn't recommend starting with those. When it comes to ZX, a good bit of the difficulty seems to come more from the game waffling between being a Mega Man title and a Metroidvania, though there are still some tricky bosses and platforming sections tossed in. Given that there is a bit of a barrier for entry, it's not really much of a surprise that all the Legacy collections thus far have had mods included to make the games a bit easier for newcomers, but what's interesting is that none of them have been exactly the same. So for funsies, why not take a look at what was chosen for each and discuss how effective each is at making the games just a bit easier to get through. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I've already laid out the premise for this one. The first Legacy collection for the Classic series uses some of the stuff that's become standard for retro game ports: save states and a rewind function. Save states are simple enough, you marking a specific point in gameplay that you can reload whenever you want. Unlike a typical checkpoint though, which will spawn you back in at the cost of a life and missing whatever weapon energy you may have used up in the meantime, with save states, you not only come back with exactly the same resources as you had when you made it, you can also choose specifically where you want the thing, rather than just letting the game decide where a good milestone is. This is one of the few features that we'll be talking about that I actually use, typically right before a boss fight where I'm worried about blowing through my weapon energy or wasting E-tanks and then still failing. Boo Beam, I'm glaring at you. One of the worst feelings in these games is going all out against the boss, using up all your tools, and then having to go right back in to face them again, but severely less prepared that round. While I've largely weaned myself off using this, except in a few very specific cases, it was a big help when I was getting back into the swing of things and greatly appreciated. When it came to the Castlevania collection Konami put out, I used this function a lot differently. Since I am much less experienced and as a result much less confident when it comes to those games, I use save slots much more frequently, every so often in just the regular levels, sometimes after clearing just a single speed bump, heck, even after just landing a single hit on a boss at points. I was using these things so often that it was actually disgusting, but I did manage to beat all the games, which would have taken a considerable amount of practice to do otherwise. It's the sort of tool that you can tailor your use on based on your needs. Just a safety net for the more experienced, and an absolute crutch for those who really need it. And I think it's the only one here that you can potentially screw yourself with. While rare, using save states too carelessly could have you lock yourself into an unwinnable situation, either creating one where you have too little health to complete a stage at your skill level, or right before getting hit with something devastating. Maybe you've overestimated how much HP you need to win, maybe you were just creating them too willy-nilly, or maybe you were trying to save just before something particularly tricky and your timing was off. Either way, since you only get one save state at a time, when that happens, your two choices are to either find some way to overcome your limits and struggle through, or, more likely, just take the L and have to restart back at a more traditional checkpoint. While save states are largely in the player's favor, there's just a tiny bit of risk that I do appreciate. The rewind is a bit more fluid. Rather than needing to pick a specific spot, you can just kind of undo any moves that you make that you don't like. And you can be as petty or as conservative as you want with it too, going back a few seconds every time you take a hit to give yourself a perfect run, or only using it for really big and fatal mistakes, like flubbing a jump over a pit. Since these are NES titles, which used a much narrower screen than what we're used to these days, there can be quite a few instances of you getting sucker punched by something that doesn't appear until pretty close to impact, and I know I complained about several parts of Mega Man 5 where it feels like you take cheap damage or deaths, so Rewind really helps with stuff like this. Plus, if used liberally enough, these titles can start feeling like a whole new set of games. I watched one person stream too, and once they gave up and started really abusing the Rewind, their chat started joking that it had turned into Prince of Persia. While the time stopper is pretty neat, having the actual power to reverse time sounds interesting, so maybe I should give it a try at some point. The only real risk I can see with this is getting a little too trigger happy with it and undoing something you shouldn't have, though that's kinda grasping for a downside. Of course, all of this might have been a little much, and the second Legacy Collection tones things down a bit. Instead of save states, this one has checkpoint saves. Make it to a checkpoint, use this option, and even if you game over, you can just reload this and not have to worry about losing progress. It'll take note of what your health bar and ammo look like, so you can't use it for a cheap refresher, plus, you need to know where the checkpoints are located to make the most of it, but since I think all of the games here have an autosave icon when you reach them, it isn't much of a problem. While it's not nearly as overpowered as the save states and rewind functions, it can still make it so that you don't have to worry about lives if you use it right. This works largely the same way that I used save states in previous titles, using it to make sure that I didn't screw myself using all my ammo or tanks on a boss and then lose anyway. My biggest issue with Mega Man 7 is the Wily Capsule, since if you fail big time against it, you not only have to rebuy all your tanks, but you also have to do the whole dang boss rush over, which gets really frustrating really fast. Checkpoint saves not only completely redeem this fight, or at least mostly redeem, but having that safety net really cuts down on stress and can even let me enjoy the battle. You know, like you're supposed to do with video games. They also provide a bit of extra confidence, to the point where the past few runs of 7, I've been taking out the capsule in 1, since I don't have to worry about whether this round is the one and holding off on using my health refills. While the general hope is that you won't have to use them, sweet Christmas. Having checkpoint saves available just in case is really nice. And that's not all. Collection 2 also has the extra armor option, which cuts the damage you take in half. Wait, really? How long has this been here? I only accessed the menu in the game. Rookie Hunter mode for the X Legacy collections severely reduces the damage you take. Seriously, most things outside of some of the tougher bosses will only hit you for 1 tick of health. My opinions on damage modifiers are a little weird. When used to make things harder, you getting hit significantly more, I think it's a little lame. It feels artificial and really, any game can be difficult if there's no room for error. Heck, I could even do something like this without needing someone to program it in, just resetting or SDing if I judge that I've gotten hit too many times. While I know these sorts of things are popular and easy to include, at the same time, I'm not a fan of something that just feels like a cheap way to drag things out. Conversely, lowering how much damage you take I think is a good way to teach new players. It's like a practice mode of sorts, letting them get down the ins and outs, make more mistakes, and learn patterns, so that by the time they feel ready to try out the game normally, they stand a good chance of making it through the experience. I had a friend play through X1 this way, and while it did take him a while and I might have given him a bit of a hard time, I was happy to see him manage to clear the game. And one other little fun bit, having Rookie Hunter mode turned on doesn't feel too far off from just having the chest part from the start of the game. Those things really tend to reduce damage, to the point where several times after completing my armor, I'd anxiously bring up the menu to make sure I hadn't accidentally turned Rookie Hunter on. Seriously, could getting the upgrades be considered its own easy mode? The Zero ZX collection offers 2 options, Casual Scenario Mode and Save Assist. Casual Scenario is another mode that has you taking reduced damage, as well as eliminating most if not all insta-deaths. It also seems to give you some other upgrades that the website didn't mention. Holy crap, that's a lot of health, and they start you off with sub-tanks? Since the game makes you feel pretty crappy for using Cyber Elves and getting the upgrades, it is kinda nice to see them used. And since we just got done talking about damage modifiers, I'm not gonna go into that too much, other than to say how nice it is to have it for the Zero series in particular. There have been plenty of games in past years where, upon starting them up, you'll be asked to choose between a gameplay and story-focused setting. This thing seems to be the most common in RPGs, where a significant amount of effort is put into the writing and the creators are more concerned with players being able to experience it rather than to get good at combat. I can certainly see the logic and appeal. When it comes to the Zero series, not only are these games probably the hardest in the franchise, but I also think they have the best writing. While I have a few complaints, for the most part, there's a lot of lore, some pretty great twists, it has some questions that feel especially poignant these days, and I don't think there's ever bver been a video game bad guy I ever wanted to kill quite as much as Dr. Vile. Giving people the chance to experience the story without constantly kicking their teeth in is really nice and thoughtful. Then there's Save Assist. Touch one of these little stations and, upon death, you'll start back up here. Heck, you can even reload one of these at any time. Activating one is automatic, and while the previous instance of this just almost got rid of the concern for lives, this one absolutely does. And while of course, this also makes it so that you don't have to stress out about wasting your cyber elves, you also reload in at full health, and those checkpoints are more plentiful than the ones that were already in the game that it cost a life to respawn at. The Zero ZX collection takes what they did with the second classic collection and empowered it even further. It's especially nice for the first Zero title, since in that one, they give you limited lives that you have to make last for the entire playthrough, with few chances to restock, so it's a big help. Save Assist can even be abused. I watched one person constantly reload to make sure they got A ranks on all missions, and while it felt kinda like they were lying to themselves, at the same time, it doesn't hurt my score. People can do what makes them happy. Honestly, Save Assist is something that I should break down and use. I'm in the habit of streaming Mega Man titles, and the Inti Creates entries tend to be the ones most likely to give me a game over. While what I do on my own time is my business, I don't think anyone wants to watch me bash my head against one level over and over again. And if you disagree, let me just say that I typically don't have big reactions to my failure, meeting them with what I'd call more annoyed resignation. I'd be horrible at streaming horror games. My point is, in the interest of retaining an audience and maintaining my sanity, I should probably just suck it up and use the darn Save Assist, though I continue to refuse due to some misplaced sense of pride. And now with the Battle Network Legacy collections, we have Buster Max mode, which multiplies the damage that your Buster does with a normal Flink by 100, though anything else, like chips or charge shots, do the standard amount. This one's a bit unique since, more than an easy mode, you could look at it as more of a convenience. These games have random encounters, as you may have heard, and these can get kind of tedious as well as screw you up. There's been plenty of times I've been focused on something on the net, got pulled into a virus battle, then came out of it 30 seconds later only to get turned around, get ambushed by something I was in the middle of avoiding in a dungeon, or just completely forget what I was trying to do. It can also be really annoying if you're trying to get just from A to B, maybe to buy something from a store, or when the game has you doing a particularly egregious fetch quest. Anything that can speed up the process and get you back to doing what you were doing can be seen as a godsend. However, this is the only thing on the list that I find a bit morally questionable, shall we say, given the competitive mode. And to avoid any confusion, no, you can't use Buster Max online, but you can use it to grind out better chips, style changes, bug frags, junk chips for the chip traders, really just about any resource that you could then use to take on someone online. It feels like the glitch to duplicate rare candies and Master Balls in Pokemon Red and Blue. Of course, I may be a hypocrite since I do use the special Giga Chips you can download from the collection, which are pretty overpowered, but in my defense, they were in the original games with a code, and I only bust them out after I've beaten the main game once, which is when it feels like I've earned them. Back to Buster Max though, while it does feel like cheating, since everyone has access to it, maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way and should just view it as another tool that can be used to stay competitive. Looking at what some other players are saying, it does seem to be a pretty popular way to grind out some of the more annoying to snag chips, and even if someone were to use it to get some stuff that they wouldn't be good enough to obtain normally, they probably wouldn't have the skills to use them properly in a competitive match anyway. Like how the person with the better gun isn't guaranteed to win a shootout. Maybe if everyone's using it, it's no longer cheating but becomes standard practice. I'll admit, seeing how easily most people are willing to turn it on is causing me to reconsider my stance. Though with the same stipulations as download chips, but I do want to ask, if I use Buster Max mode, am I going to hell? So are these options really necessary, and do I think they're a good thing? Well, yes, I think I've made that pretty obvious as I've gone over them, with only Buster Max making me feel a little weird. As for why, it's kind of threefold. The first is purely selfish. When I was younger, I probably would have been the type to scoff at this sort of thing, seeing it as a bastardization of something I love and not how the games were meant to be played. These days though, I've mellowed out considerably, and I'm just glad that some people who wouldn't be able to play it otherwise now have a fighting chance of getting through the games. I love Mega Man and just really want the chance to talk about it with as many people as possible, so this does a lot to open the series up. The second reason is just the difference between games then and games now. While we get games at a breakneck pace these days, with all the indie titles and enough big companies existing that someone's normally doing something, back then, making games was a bit more specialized. So you needed them to last between releases. Not only that, but shelling out for a luxury item that only lasted you a few hours probably wouldn't feel like a great investment. So you make them hard. That'll drag things out. Beat-em-ups were purposefully unfair to build quarters out of you in the arcades, while most console titles normally took the challenging but fair route, though the effect's the same either way. No one's just sitting down and clearing one of these things in a single sitting, especially since they're not going to have years of experience under their belt with the relatively new medium. Plus, with it being largely a kid's hobby back then, with their limited allowance making it so that they could only get a new game a few times a year, you could make a game as bad or as brutally challenging as you want and they will still play it into the ground. But these days, everyone plays. And like I said before, we have a constant stream of things releasing, so stretching things out isn't as necessary. On the contrary, hours of no progress could actually turn someone off instead, since there are so many other options, so now they can be a bit more forgiving with expectations. The third and most significant reason is kind of a combination of the previous two, growing the audience. While I'm sure most people watching this would be happy if Mega Man 12 dropped tomorrow with only the standard and superhero difficulties, we're kind of in the minority. There's plenty of people that would give it a try because they saw Mega Man in Smash, saw hype from veterans, had a friend recommend it, or just think the little guy looks cute, and a lot of them are going to have trouble picking up boss patterns and figuring out how to do short hops and abuse iframes. There's also professional reviewers to consider, and having a bunch of them complain about a type of challenge that hasn't been popular in years could really hurt a game's chances. I hate to bring up the Cuphead thing, since it's kind of overdone, but it is relevant. Luckily, no one took that critique too seriously. Getting more copies into people's hands could lead to more games getting greenlit, but if the new players don't stick around, the success will be short-lived. And if they do try it out and like it, I think playing under less strenuous conditions will get them up to speed pretty quickly. Most people don't need training wheels for too long. Making the games easier to get into can be pretty important for growth, and I have a pretty powerful example of this. Fire Emblem. Yes, I'm going there again. Used to be incredibly niche. You were either way into it, or at most, knew Marth and Ike from Smash, no in between. It was pretty hardcore. A strategy RPG where some maps could take hours to complete, and with permadeath, a single mistake could force you to choose between doing everything over again or just sacking a character. Forget fans gatekeeping the series, the games themselves did this with just how unforgiving they were. Then Awakening came along, with the option to turn off permadeath, and while I don't think this is the main reason why so many people picked it up, I don't think many would have stuck around without it. Later adding in the ability to rewind turns, and I think all the difficulty concessions played a significant part in Three Houses being such a runaway success. While some fans might bemoan these optional changes to the formula, I don't think they'd be getting nearly as much content without it. And I think Nintendo is trying to replicate this success with Pikmin 4. Everyone who's ever played a Pikmin game has had at least one instance where they really screwed up and gotten dozens of their little buddies killed. They've also come up against new enemies and had to figure out the best way to take them out with some combination of observation, experimentation, and intuition. Both are just par of the course and I think part of the series' appeal, yet a recent trailer showcased ways to bypass both of them, with a rewind function and a risk-free training mode for baddies. I took a lot of issue with Fire Emblem adding in a casual mode originally, and likewise, my knee-jerk reaction here was that this would make Pikmin too easy, but thinking about it, I realized how many people that have been previously scared off by the possibility of a massacre might now give the game a chance. While I'll still be playing the game as I always have, thinking that this could help Pikmin 5 take less than 10 years to come out does have me a bit excited. To bring it back to Mega Man, I think we can all agree that we're in a bit of a lull right now. While the reasons might be different, I don't think it's hard to draw comparisons between us and Fire Emblem pre-Awakening, and if we do get a new game, I think difficulty options are going to be essential to Mega Man becoming a household name again. The Legacy Collections and 11 have both gotten the ball rolling, with X and 11 doing particularly well, And the Battle Network compilation's currently doing numbers. If Pikmin 4 is also a success, it'll only further back up my point, but I'm telling you, making these games accessible to all audiences is key. And yes, I'm including hardcore players in that as well. Keep the superhero modes coming. So there you go. What initially started as a look at some of the extra features in the Legacy collections for the novelty of it has, once again, devolved into me banging my drum about accessibility options being the future of the franchise. That goes for the fan base as well. While what I've seen has largely been positive, I also keep my Twitter on following, and I've heard some horror stories from others. If anyone thinks I'm being too soft and coddling, I've got two counter-arguments. Difficulty options are just that, options, and like I've mentioned for just about everything discussed here, I tend not to use them and you don't have to either. And second, being more welcoming leads to more fans, which leads to more sales, which leads to more games, so even if it seems like I'm advocating for something that won't affect us, it really could. I've always thought Mega Man was a much better face for Capcom than Ryu, and for a time he arguably was, so a return to prominence would be a dream. To reiterate though, I just love Mega Man and love sharing the series with as many people as possible, so anything that could help more become fans is a win for me. That's about all I have to say on the topic, so I'll turn it back on you. Do you use any of these functions? Do you think they're good additions or consider them blasphemy? And am I overselling their importance in the current landscape? I know the Get Good crowd has amassed a lot of infamy in the medium, so I'm curious to see how Mega Man folks would feel about the subject. As always, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man for everlasting peace.